Let me bring your attention, gentlemen, to a different story on page 4. Members of Parliament summoned the Central Bank of Kenya boss over rules on large cash deals. So the aspect of this specific story is if you are planning to withdraw or deposit 10,000 US dollars, which is about 1 million Kenyan shillings, members of Parliament are saying that the paperwork, the transactions for 1 million are just too much. Members of Parliament claim that rules requiring disclosure of sources of cash or intend use have inconvenienced many of them. But CBK is saying this is there to make sure that we are putting any suspicious transactions on the radar. I'll begin with you, Honorable Chris Wamalwa, as also a member of Parliament for Kiminini. Where do you stand on this specific story? Do you agree? Do you feel as if what the bank requires for a Kenyan to deposit or to withdraw 1 million Kenyan shillings, the paperwork is too much? Where do you stand on that?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, we need to understand that Central Bank is a regulator in the banking industry. And when you look at the CBK Act, it allows the governor of Central Bank to put regulations in place. And once you put regulations in place, when you look at the Statutory Instrument Act, once those regulations are gazetted, you need to bring them to Parliament. We have a committee in Parliament called for delegated legislation. This committee will be able to look at that particular regulation. They'll give a report to the floor of the House. Members of Parliament will debate. And in their own wisdom, if they see the regulation does not make sense or add value, they nullify. But once a regulation has been put in place and is been gazetted, it can be enforced. So what is happening to Central Bank? And for me, there are merits and the demerits here. Why this regulation was in place was to avoid cases of money laundering.
Exactly.
That is very critical. And as far as that law is concerned, the governor of Central Bank was purely in order. It was within the framework of the law to put a regulation in place. But the unfortunate thing is that regulation has taken too long to come to the floor of the House for purposes of the Committee of Delegated Legislation to look into it. It is this committee, after it has gone through, has involved the critical stakeholders, they can be able to nullify. So as far as the issue of money laundering is concerned, that one is perfectly in place. The issue of disclosure, it is paperwork, yes. Every regulation has merits and demerits. Right now you want to withdraw 1 million, you'll be asked for what purposes. If you want to withdraw, they'll say, or you are getting 1 million, where is it coming from? That's why you have issues like RTGS, for instance, the real-time gross transferring. That one for you, after, if you have money beyond 1 million, you can't use the checks. You must use the RTGS system. So full disclosure to me, I find there's no problem. Maybe they can improve on that paperwork because it is actually tedious. But if you've nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong with it.
So for you, you're saying let's move from paperwork to a more digital aspect.
Absolutely, but we are saying, but what we are saying, this regulation, the Central Bank governor has delayed to bring the regulations to the floor of the House for the Committee on Delegated Legislation to go through it. But it's purely in order. You can, he can put regulations in place and he can enforce. It's within the law. Senator
Ledama, let me rope you in. A Kenyan would be thinking, when you hear members of Parliament, given the corruption levels that we have in this country, every single week there's a corruption case, and at the helm of it, it's our political leaders. One would ask, why is it that our members of Parliament are saying that perhaps we need to relook at this regulation, which in essence helps money laundering, right? And when this is coming from our members of Parliament, politicians in general, who are the first when it comes to corruption cases, someone would say this is quite suspicious. It raises eyebrows.
You know, my view is completely different. I just think that whenever you go to a bank to borrow money, they carry out serious due diligence. And I think that's where these regulations ought to take into consideration. Because when you read the story, you'll hear incidences where money, the source of money, is well known to be a mortgage money which is given to the MP. Now, when you transfer that money from one account into another account, you've got to fill a lot of paperwork. So I think we have to figure out what is the history of this client. Has this client been handling large cash, so that you can be able to differentiate his activities with an activity of just a new guy who has come in, putting in 5 million, 10 million, and trying to withdraw the money. So I think, in my view, I think there has to be a connection between the government policy or central bank policy and the legislation. And then looking into it, it is wrong to say it's only the MPs who are complaining, you know. And I think Kenyans out there ought to know that all businessmen are complaining. So I think we've got to bring this. The only reason why they're using the word MPs is because MPs are elected to represent the people. So the MPs out there, you know, like Junet Mohammed or Aden Duale, you know, or even Badi, who are quoted in the newspaper, they're not there just talking about their own interest. They are representing other businesses, who are the businessmen who do that. Okay. You know? So I think they've got to carry out proper due diligence so that you're not subjected to every single day, you know, filling of this paperwork. It's tedious. And let us be realistic. What happened to that paperwork? You know, it's treated the same way most of reports from parliaments are treated. It just collects a bunch of dust.
And that leads me to the question that I want to ask you. Recently, I think it was on February 6th or 7th, that we saw a report indicating that certain banks were being investigated for how they handled certain money from the NYS scandal. And they were being accused of not reporting to the Financial Reporting Center and the CBK not taking action against them. So CBK was coming to find them. So we have a regulation. People are told that for the transaction of $1 million shillings, you have to declare. But then again, the enforcement appears not to be with the same spirit.
This debate, and I was having a discussion around it with a member of the National Assembly yesterday, is so elitist. It is so removed from the ordinary cares of the Mwananchi. There's a telco that launched a service, I think it's called Fuliza. Yeah. And within a few days, they had lent out billions. There are all these apps that people are using across the country to borrow money. The people who can transact $1 million shillings in this country, account to account, is such a select few, is such an elitist group, that for members of the National Assembly or members of Parliament in general, to make this sound like a national crisis is to miss the point by a mile. Members of Parliament, we say that we are not paid adequately and that we need to improve our payment so that it goes hand in hand with the requirements and expectations of the people. None of us here gets a net salary of $1 million shillings. That is just the story out there. So I think the angle that the debate took was a little bit unfortunate, where we are saying that we are inconvenienced when it comes to disclosure. We know what money laundering can do to an economy. You've seen the other headline is about drugs. Drug trade is fueled by illegal money, and when that money has now been acquired, it needs to be cleansed and put back in a financial system. And that's what those regulations do. In NYS, money was carried in sacks. In Ruaraka, money was transferred and withdrawn almost immediately it hit the accounts. There shouldn't be a problem when someone is doing legitimate business. If Aden Duale sells camels, let him declare how many camels he sold. My view, if I sold fish, let me declare the source of that fish. However, the fundamental issue, and I think the debate started off from the right footing, but it veered off into dangerous territory. It was the issue of regulations versus circulars and letters. And this is something that we have seen,
and that's
even
why I'm
the Treasury.
That's why I'm asking this specific question. There are those regulations, but banks, during investigation in regards to NYS, were found that they were not declaring those transactions. So who's fooling who?
Exactly. The regulator needs to have a much more proactive approach to looking at these things. You saw the other day that a bank manager has been arraigned in court on charges of abetting terrorism. Why? Because certain persons who are accused of terror opened accounts in that bank. We are seeing the regulator being a little bit more reactive than proactive. So they need to build their capacity to proactively monitor and regulate that space.
Senator, I hear what you're saying. Apart from just getting rid of the paperwork, you want a much more productive system put in place.
Proactive system,
so
yes.
Then, gentlemen, my next question would be, yes, how do we then have a better system, less paperwork, when bankers know, when the banks know, listen, this is someone who transacts more than $1 million. It doesn't raise eyebrows. But at the same time, we have a system that also keeps an eye on money laundering. Then how do we do that?
I think, in my view, if you look at the whole transaction, whenever you write a check from your bank, if let's say, for instance, I was paying the distinguished senator $1 million shillings for a transaction that he and I have carried, the bank calls me before the clearing center clears that transaction. So I think what we ought to do is this, and I want to refer back to what the distinguished senator was talking about in regards to the issues of Ruaraka, in regards to the issues of NYS. You know, that when you look at it, In fact, CBK coming in and saying we're investigating banks, it's an afterthought. You should stop it from the beginning. The law is very, very clear. So carry out proper due diligence, know your clients, you know, and then before you make a phone call to the client and say, hey, Olekina, did you write a check for 1 million to Senator, you know, Senator so-and-so, you know, Kajuang or anyone else? Yes, I did. You know, at that moment, you know, they are carrying out their proper due diligence. And he's also declared what the money is being paid is for. So I think to get to that level of NYS and Waraka is a complete disregard to the rule of law.
Now, my take on that, in banking industry, there's something called KYC. KYC means know your customer. It is your responsibility as a bank to know your customer in terms of cash flow analysis. If your salary is 50,000 and all of a sudden...
Sorry to cut you short. Let's just listen in to Ibrahim Omar from Wajir. Ibrahim, good morning and thank you for watching Daybreak. What's your question or concern? Well, unfortunately, we lost him.
All right, we'll try and get him back. Yes.
Just carry on.
Yeah, I was talking about KYC. KYC means know your customer. Every banker has a responsibility to know who the customer is. They do something called the cash flow analysis. If your salary or your business, you normally get 500,000, or let's say your salary is 50,000, and all of a sudden, your bank account, 1 million hits in. So the issue is this: it is the responsibility to probe further and see where is this million coming from. And the issue of money laundering has actually made this country's security to be worse. When you talk about the youth radicalization, recently the Diamond Trust Bank, they was being fined that they must have helped this person of the Dusit attack. You know, so the issue is this: they allowed some big transactions to go through the account, but when you look at the analysis, this person from the projection, when you extrapolate, interpolate the amount of money that was coming in, was not in millions. So it's the responsibility of the bank to be able to notice that and report it to the central bank. If not, central bank normally gives fines that these banks have to pay. So to me, central bank is doing what is required as per the law. The only issue is, if people have problems with the full disclosure, I think we need to probe further and see, what are you hiding? You should not have a problem if the money is clean for you to disclose. The only issue is maybe it's tedious. I know it's very tedious, it's very, very involving. And as Honorable Kajuang says, how many people transact more than a million in this country?
And allow me to, just to respond specifically to your last one. You know, there's a financial reporting center, which is supposed to be the one banks report to, and is the one that's supposed to detect and flag those illicit transfers. We have seen cases where FRC has given instructions to stop or to, you know, suspend certain accounts. But then after some time, I think even in the Waraka case, that was when monies went to certain accounts, there was a red flag, transactions were stopped, but it was lifted thereafter. The issue, and as I said, it was unfortunate that the debate veered into the faith and personal life and other things about the CBK governor. The issue is that the CBK governor has an obligation to bring regulations to Parliament. I think that's what we need to focus on, rather than the other sideshows that the debate attracted.
You know, the man was being attacked that is Opus Dei. What does it have to do with your religion?
It has nothing to do with the job that he's doing. So let's focus on a different story that is on the front page of the Daily Nation. Ministry stops laptops project and will now build computer labs. That's the story whose full report is on the back page. Of course, there are 25,000 primary schools that were supposed to receive laptops back in 2015-16.
Yes.
And the last time I spoke to the Cabinet Secretary for ICT, Joe Moshero, he spoke about this particular matter. But before we get into that, Ibrahim Omar from Wajir is back.
Yes. Ibrahim, good morning. All right, Ibrahim, what's your question or comment to the conversation we're having here in studio?
Ni Swahili ile nilikuwa nataka kusema hivi. Hello.
Yes, endelea.
Nataka kusema hivi, najua hii mambo ya kusema wakati unaweka unachukua pesa lazima useme ile sababu unatoa hiyo pesa. Inaharibu ile nidhamu ya banki. Manake ni kama unahujumu mteja wa banki. Kwa sababu unaweka mali yako na unatoa. Basi tuseme leo ni siku ya kununua bombe katika sehemu hii ya Wajir. Sasa mtu anapeleka soko bombe yake mahali nyingine, anaweka banki pesa. Sasa ku withdraw naambiwa na ulinunua ng'ombe, sasa unataka kupeana mteja yako tuseme kama milioni 2, milioni 3, sasa inakuwa shida.
All right.
Sababu unaona watu wengi badala ya kuweka banki pesa wanaweka nyumbani. Unaona ile ya uchumi vile inakuaga.
All right, thank you so much, Ibrahim Omar. Of course, he's giving that perspective that you get your money, you go deposit in an account, and then as you withdraw it, you need to give a reason. Just some sort of frustration.
That's true. When it's taken to the bank, it's faster. When it's you receiving back your money, they take a...
But is it such an inconvenience, really?
The biggest inconvenience is in deposits. Let's be honest, cash deposits. So you wake up one morning and you've got 2,000 shillings in your bank account, and you come and deposit 4 million shillings. Wouldn't anyone want to ask what is the source of the money? Or you go and deposit in Ledama's account, maybe 5 million shillings. Wouldn't one want to find out why am I bequeathing Ledama 5 million shillings? I think that is a legitimate question to ask. Earning 1 shilling in this economy is not easy. And so when you come up with $1 million bob, you should be in a position to document and trace how that money came.
But I think listening to Ibrahim and calling from Wajir, here's a point. Because we trade, we're pastoralists. We trade in cows. And let me tell you, that's one of the biggest economy in this country. I mean, I trade in cows. And sometimes over the weekend you can trade and you make like 1 million shilling. It doesn't mean that that's your entire profit. It just means that that's your transaction, amount for the week. So I think the key most important thing is that we have got to remember this, that in this country called Kenya, we live in 2 different centuries. In Nairobi, I'm a believer that we live in the 21st century. In other parts of West Pokot, Wajir, or even some parts of Narok, we are still in the 19th century. So you cannot expect the people from the 19th century to know what is happening in the 21st century. So what we need to do is to be able to educate the public, slowly by slowly, to a point where they can also be able to leapfrog into the current century.